Now, I've done a lot of work on the secret history of British biowarfare experimentation. You can obviously fill me in on many of the blanks I have on this subject. So, first off, let's start with what was it being a victim of Lyme's disease which started you on this journey, and how did this personal journey begin?
Yeah, my mother had Lyme disease, so I was familiar with it. And then in 2016, I got sick, really sick, and I think it was when I went in to get medical treatment and found how they treated us. Like they would basically tell you you're not sick, and it was very controversial. And I had read that book, Lab 257, many years ago, by Michael Christopher Carroll, and that was the first book that really brought Erich Traub's name into light, the German virologist that I've connected to Lyme disease in this book. So I had read that a while back. I think it was like 2006, and my mother had Lyme disease, so I was familiar with it. And then when I got really sick, I eventually found I had Lyme disease, but I had to go to a different doctor who was considered the Lyme literate doctors, and get a certain test that isn't the CDC standard, and found that I did have Lyme disease. And I had reached out to John Loftus. John Loftus was the former Nazi hunter, and he worked at the Justice Department, hunting or prosecuting Nazi criminals hiding in America. And he was the first one to bring out that Lyme disease was the result of biological warfare activities in his 1982 book, The Belarus Secret, which is now republished as America's Nazi Secret. And he had made the first reference to it being the result of biological warfare. Now, he was the source for Michael Carroll in Lab 257 when he was talking about Erich Traub. Then I had decided when I got sick that I was gonna do this, that I was gonna research this heavily, and I did. And I reached out to John Loftus, and I showed him like this timeline that I had made, and he was like, "Wow, this is amazing. Let me introduce you to these filmmakers who are making a screenplay about the same thing." And so we started kind of corresponding together, and they put up a lot of the funding for me to get a lot of the documents, I had to collect Erich Traub's entire career of published work and a lot of his colleagues. So it was like, and somebody who used to work at Pfizer and somebody who ran a Lyme group, she taught me about the immunological side of it, like the immunology behind the Lyme disease and why it's able to go, without diagnosis, and how you can go, you could get scans, you could get blood work, it all comes back normal even though you're sick. And so I was able to learn about that, and knowing John Loftus, it put me in a unique position. And then I found she taught me about something called immune tolerance, which is basically another word for chronic immunosuppression. So chronic immune deficiency. And when I started researching Erich Traub's work, I found that he was actually its discoverer. He was the one.
Can I just interrupt you there, Adam, and ask about that, because I know that a lot of my audience, a lot of my chat, have asked me to get someone on the show to talk about Erich Traub and his work, and so this is a really massive. I sympathise with you as well, because I had something called Graves' disease, and I was told for 13, 14 years that there was nothing wrong with me, even though my body was falling apart. It took me to the point where I was 8.5 stone and clearly dying and just puking up all of the time, and they were telling me, no, everything's still fine. It took one moment. I'm really interested in Erich Traub, though. Who is Erich Traub? Can you explain who he was and what he was famous for?
Sure. Erich Traub he's basically at the center of my book. There is no book out there right now that goes into his life as much as this book does. I collected his entire his entire career of published work. I went through each paper. I could probably tell you what paper he published each year of his life. Like, that's how well I know it. And I also got many of the dossiers, the anything that we had that was able to be declassified. There's still, probably a lot that's, still classified, highly classified. And I was just like, there's something about this Traub guy. He's a very mysterious guy. And I just went all in, and I was like, I have to figure out this guy's life, his work, all of that. And now he was for the most part, he's famous about being at Plum Island, even though the CDC or the Agricultural Research Service or the USDA tries to say that, oh, there's no connection to him to Plum Island. Actually, I have his paperwork that says he was an employee there, and he was brought there under the law that they established Plum Island for. So they were planning on putting him there the entire time. And most people know him as a foot and mouth disease specialist, which isn't really what he was made. It was not his main focus. Like, there was another virus called LCM virus, which stands for lymphocytic choriomeningitis virus. And this is the virus he studied at the Rockefeller Institute in the United States before World War II. And this is where he found this condition known as it later became known as immune tolerance, but another word for it would be immune paralysis or immune exhaustion. But immune tolerance was the term, and it's kind of like this: your immune system is no longer fighting back against pathogens and material that it should otherwise be keeping out. It's tolerating nasty pathogens that are bad for you, and so they integrate and they cause a central nervous system invasion. So they basically invade into your entire body, and your immune system is too overwhelmed to fight back. That's where the word tolerance comes in. So he configured this condition. He started to study it at the Rockefeller Institute. What he did was he injected foreign antigen into a mouse's brain because he was trying to see if he could reactivate a latent virus that the mouse had within it. And that's what he did. And if you think about it, these antigens, injecting it is not unlike an inoculation that somebody would take, like a vaccine that somebody would take. And so when he did that, he realized it started an outbreak from scratch. So he realized he could start an epidemic from scratch by doing this. The reactivation of latent virus was a major study for him, but this LCM virus was the virus that allowed him to configure this. And then he started to study it, and he noticed that all of the sick mothers would give birth to sick mice, and then you'd see chronic disease, neurological disorders, and cancers skyrocket.
Wow. Yeah, that's amazing stuff, and really interesting that he's known for foot and mouth disease as well, because that's something else I've studied a lot and was, of course, used in the UK to lock down, to do kind of what how we had with the pandemic lockdown during COVID. The same sort of thing happened in 2001, early 2001, with one of the most contrived outbreaks of a disease ever that I think I've ever studied, and I've studied that in detail. That's all of this is extremely interesting, especially the idea of reactivating a virus.